Welcome, folks. My name is Dr. George Sparks, and this is Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down. With me today, I got Major Paul Hesse, retired, and we're going to be talking about the early alphabet system. It's called the proto-alphabet. So welcome, Paul.
Well, thanks, George, for having me. I had fun last time we did this, so let's see how much fun we can have today.
Today we have basically three areas that we want to cover when we talk about this proto-alphabet. And it's going to be a location where we call it the Serabit El Kadim. It's a place in northern Sinai that was once a turquoise mine, and there was an archaeologist explorer there, and he found the first alphabet inscription. The second one is actually called Wadi el-Hol, all right, and that's between Thebes and Abydos. So we're in
Right.
Egypt. And this was found not that long ago. I believe it was like 1999. It was actually, so it's not that long ago. But it also was, according to those experts, a earlier alphabet form. The next one we're going to talk about, this is going to be the main one because I think it's like the icing of the cake. You got an alphabet. How do you
Yeah.
use it? How did they use it? And they were excavating in Israel at a archaeological tell. The word tell means like a mound of debris, and these would be levels where people would live and exist and would pass away. And in the ancient world, different than our own, what would happen is that they would build over top of old settlements. Here, we basically get a bulldozer and remove it and start over again. So think of these places that we're talking about where they found an inscription at Tel Lachish in Israel as a laundry basket, where the earliest civilization there, all right, is like Monday's laundry on the bottom. And Tuesdays is right above that. And Wednesdays above that. And then we got Friday's laundry at the very top. And just think of these as being levels of occupation where people lived and for some reason they had to leave or they were conquered. So we're going to lastly go to Lachish, where in a excavated dump pile. In other words, where you place the remains. Matter of fact, I don't think it was excavated remains. I think it was the ancient remains in the ancient world where they placed their debris.
Mhm.
That becomes interesting for archaeologists too, just the dump pile, an
Yeah, the
ancient
dump
dump
pile.
pile. And while they were excavating in this pile of debris, they found a little, I'm just going to generally say ivory comb. And on that was this proto alphabet inscription. But according to one of the top epigraphers in the field, Christopher Rolston from George Washington University, is the first sentence, a complete sentence in the proto alphabet. All right. So I set everybody up for what we're going to do. We're going to look at
Right.
three inscriptions. All right. Paul, take us away.
So, well, first of all, I want to say I'm going to steal your laundry basket description of a tell. That
All right.
that puts an image in there. That's one of the best I've heard. So I'm stealing that from you right off the bat. But that first inscription that was found in the Sinai goes by a number of names. Proto-Sinaitic. I say proto-Sinaitic because it's just easier to say. But it was discovered by Sir Flinders Petrie, and it was early 1900s, I believe, when he found it. And I think originally they were talking about it as just being like graffiti in the mine. But later on, as they're finding more and more and more of these descriptions, they come to the realization that this is actually a phonetic alphabet or a phonetic script. I'll use alphabet and script probably interchangeably here. And so then the quest was on to try and figure out where did this alphabetic script come from. And the current consensus, and this is pretty solid in terms of all the academics, is that these letter forms, these script forms, came from individual hieroglyphic symbols that possess the same sound as was common for the language. Okay, so for instance, and there's charts of all of this, of how this developed from particular hieroglyphs, the symbol for A, or in Hebrew would be Aleph or something like that. They make the claim, and I'm actually looking at it here to make sure I get this right, but it comes from a reconstruction of essentially the hieroglyph of an ox head, which had the ah or a sound. And over time, it became more simplified. And instead of being looking exactly like an ox head, it eventually came down to essentially being three strokes that, if you look at it hard enough and use your imagination, say, yeah, I can see how an ox head comes from. And the same is true for, for bait or B that we have and all of that. And so they have studied this extensively, very convincingly, that these phonetic scripts or phonetic alphabets that we're seeing that cover a number of languages, from Canaanite languages to Phoenician, Hebrew, and all of that, came from these hieroglyphs. I'm a chemist, so I think of things in terms of technology. And so having a script that is phonetic is a huge technological advance. The idea that you can bring language, the ability to convey information, and you make it so that it can be easily stored, which all scripts do, whether it's cuneiform or hieroglyphs, was a way of storing information, much like we do in a computer. But then it allows its retrieval because you can then go back and read it again. So you're preserving knowledge, you're preserving history, you're preserving all types of cultural elements. The problem with the earlier scripts, like cuneiform and hieroglyphs, is that there were so many of them. That was all you were able to do. That's why we had these scribes. They were the ones that actually studied the hundreds, if not thousands, of characters that formed words that could then be conveyed, written down, and stored. So with the development of a phonetic language, you could use this script to essentially code and decode any language as long as it had the same sounds. So that's a massive improvement in technology in both the storage, preservation, and then transmission of information. And since it's phonetic, it's accessible to anybody. If you start having a society that's more literate, then, oh my gosh, you have so many more brains and insight and talents involved that the advance of civilization from that point can be pretty dramatic. So, okay, that was my long-winded way of getting to the importance of these early phonetic scripts that represented various languages.
If the community can be easily educated instead of having like hundreds of hieroglyphs, the Egyptian style of writing, or hundreds of cuneiform symbols, the Mesopotamian style writing. Now you get it down to what, like 22 symbols that you could put in a succession in an order for the pronunciation of a word. And with that, make it so much simpler. Now think about this. In studying Proto-Sinai, I come across a number of different articles, and the dates are different a little bit. The dates will vary. Some will say the proto-Sinai, the first one discovered by Sir Flinders Petrie in the turquoise mine in the Sinai. It dates to somewhere, and I'm looking at right now, they give a very general date. This one's 1900 BC. So 1700 BC. Then I've seen other articles that would date it to around 1700 to around 1550, which is actually the Hyksos period in Egypt, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
I think that to me is interesting. That to me is interesting. But if I was a culture like the Egyptians and they got all these hieroglyphs on their tombs carved in stone, and then somebody comes along now with a writing system that's a lot easier, I'm thinking like, hey, maybe we need to erase all that because nobody can read these hieroglyphs anyway, except the priest and a couple pharaohs. And let's go with this, I'd be like, okay, guess what? Back in, I might give away our age. I don't know if I should say this. Not back when we had 8-track players,
yeah,
those clunky things. You would have your favorite song, and then they clunk in the middle of your favorite song to switch over.
Right.
And now you can have, let's say, a CD. Why are you keeping your 8-track? You toss it, right? Or it's in the attic somewhere. And then we go from the CDs to now you have what, a little chip, and now we got Bluetooth where you can take the music off your phone,
Hmm.
and through Bluetooth it just goes into your car speakers. I don't need a CD anymore. I could just
Yeah.
carry my phone and have all the songs I need. I really don't need the music on the radio station no more either. I could download my favorite, and we could download just tons and tons and tons on our cell phones. How come the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians, when this came about, and somebody said, "Oy vey, look what we got here"?
Yeah.
You think the Egyptians would say, like, you know what? That's a lot easier. Man, we could all be, instead of all of us having scribes and translating, and, like you translate your cuneiform tablet and you translate the hieroglyphs now, we'd be all uniform really quick. To me, why didn't they do that? Bunch of hard heads.
It probably, well, since it was apparently more common in Canaan, which
Uh-huh.
didn't have the same level of integrated government. I mean, Egyptian government was pretty extensive and certainly not the level of wealth. You're going to get more pushback, I think. This is just me yapping.
We're having a little
Uh,
fun, I know.
it's just this is what you get when you have essentially this is like having a union of scribes, and they're like, no, 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 or an ancient guild, right, who
Right.
kept people out of the particular task or whatever, or the particular work. And so I think the Egyptians and the greater Mesopotamians would have enough scribes with enough power to quash any efforts to change the way things were done. Over time, even the cuneiform scripts kept lowering and lowering and lowering the number of ideographs that they were using. I think it's ideograph that they were using because it was just so complicated. But if you look, you have the development of essentially phonetic ways of dealing with this in areas that are not as rich as these other major areas like Egypt or other Mesopotamian. So you have to do more with less. And so the phonetic stuff in the Canaanite, to me, that kind of actually makes sense that it would
Yeah.
develop there because there was less opportunity to pay and have that many scribes. That's total speculation on my part, but I'm sure there was a little
Well,
bit of guild work in there to keep the masses down.
my dad's side of the family are from West Virginia, so with hillbillies. So if I say hillbillies, I don't mean condescending then, all right? So I thought, like, you know, during the influx of Asiatics into Egypt, the Northern Nile Delta, we even read this in the scriptural narrative that the Egyptians basically told in the scriptural narrative, Joseph, your people can stay up there because Egyptians thought of those Canaanites as being unclean. They're sheep
Mm-hmm.
herders, they're not clean shaven, and they would have lice, which we'll get into. But the thing is that they're not clean shaven. But you guys are up there, and you stay away from us to stay in your territory, right? Now, I wonder if that has something to do with it, because that's the language of the hillbillies, man. We're not using that. Oh, heck no. Look at these pretty hieroglyphs on our temples. They don't have temples, they got tents. In Canaan, you don't have pyramids, and you don't have ziggurats. If you was in Mesopotamia and you saw a ziggurat, they write in cuneiform. In Egypt, they write hieroglyphs and also Demontic, the script form. In Canaan, they're writing on the side of a wall. They're writing on potsherds. They're lucky if they get to write in stone. Maybe it's a little bit of arrogance why it didn't take off, because they actually had a great idea. There's 22 letters here. Look what we can do all this very quickly and have correspondence and trade. But no, no, what are we going to
Yeah.
do with all this on the side of our building here? Tink, 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 tink. Let's start over again. It didn't happen that way.
The fortunate thing for us is that it did stick, and these other ways of writing went away, though they lasted quite a long time. Don't we have examples of cuneiform being used up to the Persian period? It lasted a long time, and I think Egyptian hieroglyphs lasted that long as well.
Into the Roman period.
Right. But today we have the fortunate thing. Here I go. I'm going to digress. So, this is what makes me hate emojis, because to me, one of the greatest accomplishments for literacy was phonetic languages. and getting away from essentially pictograms. And
Right.
so when these emojis started coming out, I'm sitting here thinking we're going backwards, right? It's like all of a sudden you have these little pictographs that are supposed to, convey information. And I don't know if you've ever gone on your phone recently to see how many little
Yes.
emojis there are, but there's thousands of them. How can you possibly know what they mean? And people try and communicate with those things, and I'm like, goodness, we're taking a step backwards in literacy.
That's a good point because even if you're just texting, they'll want to insert one for you. They'll
Oh
come up.
yeah, yeah,
Like I say, my kid's going to school, then they'll put a schoolhouse in there. If I say
yeah,
it twice, or the school bus, all of a sudden here comes the bus.
yeah, yeah.
And I think like, and yeah, if you got a text, if I get a text message and it's nothing but these emojis, matter of fact, I tell my son, I said, you need to make complete sentences and capitalized with a question mark, with the period. You know,
Right.
it's still important. I said, when you send me these little symbols, I tell him, I said, I got downplay it. I call them emojis. I said, if you send me one more emoji, I'm going to flush your text. I said, I do not want to see that. That's funny that you mentioned that, but very true.
Well, let's go to the next one.
And it is the Wadi el-Hol inscription. And that was found in Egypt.
That's actually your area.
It was found between 1990. I thought it was 1999. It's 1994, 1995.
Mhm.
And it's not found by a husband and wife team. Let me get their names right. John Darnell and his wife Deborah Darnell, husband and wife team. They were actually out like on some kind of trail. They're searching, and if you think about that, it's kind of what Petrie was doing in
Hmm.
some of the earlier articles when it mentions finding the inscription, the proto-Sinaitic inscription. It mentions Sir Flinders Petrie and his wife too, a husband and wife team,
Hmm.
found that inscription first. All right. And now we have the second inscription that was found, first one around 1905. So it's been over 100 years. And then the second one that we're going to talk about, 1994. And it was found along a Theban desert road. And there was some kind of survey team that they were doing a survey, a search, and they went off and they were searching through caravan trails. They found this on a single rock inscription, and it's called Wadi. When we think of a Wadi here in New Mexico, we would say an arroyos. It's where water flows when it comes down the mountains and it goes to a low depressed area, and it can happen very quickly. They found this close to this Wadi, and it's called Wadi el-Hol. So in this inscription, what's interesting about it is that these inscriptions, this alphabetic form, actually looks more like the hieroglyphs than the ones that Petrie found in 1905 in the Sinai,
Okay.
which made them more certain that the way they actually came up with this early alphabet was from the hieroglyphs. So these were people that they're assuming, since they're in the mines and they're working and they're doing hard tasks, that they could have been slaves, they could have been prisoners, but they were from Egypt. Now, you could probably be a prisoner and be pretty smart, just like what happened to Joseph and the butcher
Hmm.
and the baker and the candlestick maker. They were smart, but they ended up in jail. So I can imagine the same thing can happen in ancient Egypt. They end up in the Sinai mines and they want to communicate, and these probably brilliant people developed this method. Now, the one that was found in Wadi el-Hol, they're actually dating it earlier because it looks more like the hieroglyph,
Hmm.
which makes sense.
Yeah,
The
it
alpha
does.
looks more like a cow's head because that's how it developed. And slowly gets turned into like lines that like sticks, drawing like. But
Right.
anyway, well, I'll insert some pictures so people know what exactly we're talking about. But that's Wadi el-Hol. So the first one was Sir Flinders Petrie and his wife. And then we have the second one, 1994, 1995, by the Darnell family. Very cool. How'd you like to go on a family hike and then find something that
Oh,
meaningful to archaeology?
oh my goodness, yes. And so you wonder if they were on a hike, unless they were these people that take these hikes over uncharted territory. think about how many people passed that and never saw what they saw, hiding in plain sight, sort of like the Tel Dan inscription, right, was found. It was, I believe the piece was actually in a secondary structure, and they had passed that excavation upon excavation and never saw it until one day, I guess, when the light's just right and they see this.
Right.
So yeah, it's amazing when that stuff happens. Or like the Siloam inscription being found by a kid who actually had cut school, if you remember that. And
Right.
he's just kind of floating around in the water in Hezekiah's tunnel, and he just kind of feels the side of the thing, and he notices that it's a lot smoother and all of that, and he just discovers it. It's amazing how things are found.
So let me read real quick here what it says is in as 1994 1995, John Coleman Darnell and Deborah Carnell, who started searching along the caravan trail in the western desert west of Luxor in the Theban Desert Road Survey. I guess maybe they had some kind of business as well. Discovered two single line rock inscriptions called the Wadi el-Hol near Thebes in Upper Egypt. Now, people got to understand Upper Egypt is on a map is south.
Right.
South is Upper Egypt, north is Lower Egypt, because they're looking in the direction of the flow of the Nile River.
Right.
That's what's going on. All right. So Upper Egypt down by Thebes. Now, those inscriptions are written in a script that closely resembled the proto-Sinaitic at Serebet el Kadim. That was the one found by Sir Flinders Petrie and his wife. So a husband and wife team found these two inscriptions, proto, early alphabet, proto. Now they got what's called the, it's hard to say. It's called
right.
the abecedary. How do you say it?
Abecedary, I think. I don't
know. Abecary. I've seen it spelt different ways too. Abecedary, proto-Sinaitic, abecedary, abecedary. No.
We're such professionals here.
Well, this is what they're writing, and they get like two different, spellings of the same word. That's fine. I think people understand what we're trying to say, and we're having fun at the same time.
Yes, that's true.
So the second one found by the Darnells was the earliest, dated to around 1900 BC, which is interesting too, because the tomb painting of Beni Hassan dates to 1900. Now, Beni Hassan means the sons of Hassan, and it shows Asiatics migrating into Egypt, all right, and bringing their bellows, because, even the Bible, it talks about the Canaanites being forgers of metal. And they're also wearing what? Coats of
many colors.
Now, I'm not going to say these are the Hebrews. No, I can't say it. But I think the Bible does reflect certain events that happen through time. Even if we can't just nail down the date, they mentioned something that was fashionable. And here these people are presenting themselves to the Egyptians authorities to migrate into Egypt, probably with their skills, and also settle probably in that place called Avaris. At one time, I read that Avaris was the biggest city in the ancient world. Avaris was a city that was populated by Asiatics, populated by foreigners, and not just Asiatics that come from Mesopotamia, but also from Canaan. And when we look at Canaan, we got all the different groups that are in Canaan. One, for instance, was also called the Sashu. And it's the Sashu where we find a hieroglyph in Egypt, which actually has the oldest representation in hieroglyph of the name Yahu or Yahweh, the Tetragrammaton. So it gets really, really fascinating. So moving on. Okay, I did this one. Now your turn. We're going to talk about, this is the cool one. This is the one we're waiting for.
So in 2016 at Lachish, so they found this, and it was in a secondary area. It wasn't in a layer that they could date. So like you were saying, it's like this was something that was just thrown away. What it was is this small ivory comb. It's about an inch long by probably like an inch by an inch, maybe an inch and a half. It has teeth on either side. And so there's wider teeth on one side, and sadly the teeth are all broken off, but we have the little foundation points where the teeth started. They had like 6 teeth on one side and then a larger number of teeth on the other side. what this would have been used for would have been to as a comb, as you said. And so the one with the bigger teeth would have been to tease out the tangles, right? To comb the hair out and untangle things. But the smaller side would have been used to dig lice out of your hair and out of your scalp. They looked at it under microscopes and all this other types of technology, and they actually did find lice bodies embedded on the lice side of the comb, which of course made them think, hey, we're onto something here. This is pretty cool. It's really small. They didn't really think a whole lot about it until later when, I can't remember the person's name, looked at it again and realized there was an inscription on it. And so they took different types of different angle lighting in order to try and bring this inscription out. And they were able to discover 17 different letters. And this is in what they're calling a proto-Canaanite script. It's old. And they're saying that it dates to at least 1700 BC. Okay, so not the oldest inscription or not the oldest set of letters, but it is the first and oldest example of a complete sentence in a Canaanite language. The interesting thing is that whoever inscribed this on there, one, had to have tremendous eyesight, because inscribing these small letters on a really little comb is to me in and of itself amazing. It's interesting because the letters are of different size. They start out a little bit bigger and then they get smaller as the room on the comb becomes less. So part of the inscription is written in an orientation that you can read from having the small teeth at the bottom. But then to read the other part of the inscription, you have to turn the comb around. So essentially, the inscription is head to head in terms of the letters. So you actually turn it upside down. And what's interesting is that the guy, again, whoever inscribed this, ran out of room, and the last letter had to be like a little bit below. And I think about when I write up a card or something, and I'm trying to put a little note on it, and I start running out of room. I got to write smaller, and and all of that. And so it's really fascinating to do this. So the inscription itself consists of, it was about 7 words.
It says written in the ancient language of the Canaanites. So they're calling it proto-Canaanite, not proto-Hebrew, the proto-Canaanite. It simply reads, may this tusk root out the lice of the hair and the beard. That's what it says. And as the scribe was running out of room on the comb, he has to adjust his letters accordingly so they all fit. What I thought was interesting, according to this article, now I use the word ivory, but it's actually elephant tusk. And they say elephants are not found in Canaan, but they did have them of course, in Africa. People don't realize that Egypt is Africa. No,
right.
I think it's completely. So yeah, they have elephants in Egypt. So the comb itself came from Egypt, was transported on the trade route, probably because we're looking at Lachish. It's on the trade route. It's a very large tell. And when it was there, of course, now they have scribes, 1700 BC. 3,700 years ago, a scribe was at Lachish, more than likely, and used the proto-alphabet on this comb.
Right.
That's amazing.
To the point where they actually have sentence and sentence structures.
They wrote that on there. It's one side for a comb and the other side to remove lice. He wrote instructions. He wrote instructions on a comb.
Right.
Now, the problem is like, I'm going to go off subject a little bit, Paul. I like Monster. I like the Red Bulls and the Monster drinks. But if you look at the can, there's instructions that tells you who should drink it and who should not drink it.
Right.
Well, right now I'm 64. You think I can read what's on this can? Oh, heck no, I can't read what's on this can. No. So it says, caution, do not drink this if you're under 18 or if you're over 50. And I had to use magnifying glasses to see it. And I'm 64. I said, well, how in the world they expect somebody to read that's my age? I'd have to have somebody hold the can for me and bring it, But the thing is that somebody wrote instructions on a comb. Somebody had to read those instructions.
Mm-hmm.
This is what it's for. This is what the small comb is for, the small bristles. The larger ones are to mat out your hair, and the smaller ones are for the lice. And like you said, they found lice. This is the first sentence ever found in the Canaanite language in Israel. No, they're talking about proto-Canaanite, which they already stated. And this individual, his name is Joseph Garfinkel, the
Mhm.
archaeologist in the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. So we're looking at the earliest proto-Canaanite language ever found in Israel to this time in a sentence. That is just the implications are a lot. It's really cool.
Languages develop naturally, they evolve right over time. Words change, word orders change, and it's only later that people write down the rules of the language. So when we were in our English classes and learning all the rules of sentence structure and all of that, that came so much later than the actual language, because you got to have a language in place in order to analyze its structure. So the fact that this is actually a sentence that has grammatical elements to it, from where the verb versus the nouns, right, or and the subjects and all of that are, tells you, again, to me, just a tremendous technological development. Literacy must have been a lot higher than maybe what we think, if, as you say, that this is an instruction on a comb.
Right?
This is how you use it. It could be a blessing, but in any case, somebody had to write it, but then somebody had to read it. Since this is made of elephant tusk, this is not a cheap thing. This is from someone who probably has more than two nickels to rub together, right? I mean, this
Yeah,
is probably
absolutely.
from
Yeah.
someone who's fairly rich or wealthy, well off, in order to afford that. But what's interesting is that, as the chemist, the one major article talks about all the analyses they did to figure out what this stuff actually was, because the problem was, since it wasn't in a datable layer that had essentially been thrown away, they actually used the letters to figure out how old it was. They
Right.
used paleography to figure out how old it was. And one of the reasons was, while a tusk has enough carbon in it to do carbon dating, all of the samples they sent off came back inconclusive. They essentially failed. So, so this is truly a dating method based on what the letters look like.
Okay.
And to me, to be able to do that, to me, is absolutely amazing.
I'm reading a part of an article right now. Excuse me, just let me interject real quick because you mentioned epigrapher. That's somebody that actually reads ancient writing. One that's coming in the news a lot. Dr. Christopher Rolston of George Washington University. You hear about he has his own blog. If you're not familiar with it, on the web, and he does his translations, and then he gives his opinions. Fascinating website for Woolston, George Washington University. If you're interested in this type of academics, which is fascinating, I recommend going to his site. This is a quote: "The fact that the inscription is about ordinary life is especially fascinating." Christopher A. Rosta of George Washington University, who did the peer review. So he did the peer review on the comb. And he says this in, of course, it says the times of Israel. So it's in the, he said, throughout human history, lice has been a problem. And this inscription nicely reveals that even the rich and famous in the ancient times, or actually also in modern times, are not exempt from such problems. That's his quote. So yeah, Christopher Woolston did the translation. He did their peer review on the comb. So
Yeah, again, finding a complete sentence that old, I mean, that's amazing. And to find it on, essentially, well, I wouldn't necessarily say it was common in terms of its material, which is elephant tusk, but common because they've found all kinds of combs in various excavations, and they too find lice in them. But yeah, the idea that this was a common, well, one, it was a common problem. Two, there was like one way of dealing with it, which was to try and comb it all out, and that pretty much everybody suffered from it. That's a neat look into daily life in the time of these ancient peoples. So you get up every morning, you got your bed hair, it's all smashed on one side. So you grab out your comb and you're trying to tease it out because you want to look good for people. And then the next thing you know, man, you got these tangles and everything. And then it's like, okay, so I get this tangle out. Now I got to deal with the lice, right? And you're combing out all the lice. So again, it's daily life, and we probably don't get enough of that, enough insight into daily life for most things.
That ancient time, a day in the ancient world would be absolutely miserable. I'm thinking about lice. I'm thinking about a toothache. I wake up and take ibuprofen. I'm getting off subject again, but they did have, remember, bills. You
Yeah,
find the
yeah,
bills, those Cyprophoenician, they call them ring-based ware, and they analyzed what was inside that. It was opium. So they did have their own little
yeah.
tools. You might not be able to tell where you're at, but you'd be out of pain. The way they talk about this discovery, and they're using certain terminologies like proto-Canaanite versus proto-Phoenician. Well, they don't say, I don't think there's a proto-Phoenician. I think they say probably a Paleo-Phoenician or Paleo-Hebrew. They
Right.
don't say proto-Hebrew. I don't see any academic that I've seen in these articles say proto-Hebrew. And the reason for that is that they are, like identifying it with the proto-Israelites, as Bill Deaver would have called them, or does call
Right.
them. The earliest form, the earliest settling tribes in the land of Canaan that we know as Israel. There is no proto-Israel. People sometimes think that the alphabet and the pyramids and all this stuff was, I don't know where they get these ideas. You know who built it? The Hebrews built it because they were in Egypt. They built the pyramids. You never even read the pyramids about the pyramids in the Bible.
Right.
Probably because it's over 200 miles away from Goshen, where they were in the biblical narrative staying. All right. Uh, and then you hear about this early inscription right away. I think it's a clue about the speaker sometimes. And, you hate to do this. But the thing is, you got a speaker, he's talking about a subject, and he calls this type of writing, proto Hebrew, proto-alphabet Hebrew. And right away, what's that telling anybody that's done the little bit of research we did? It says this boy don't know what he's talking about. The terminologies that scholars use, the methodology that the scholars use within the peer review. When somebody's lecturing on a topic and they diverse from that, to me, that's a clue. Where else is this going to go? And how full of bull am I getting ready to listen to?
There's a certain level of academic departure from the idea of what academic science is trying to do. Each discipline has its own jargon. There's a reason for that, and that is because your particular jargon has specific meanings, and when you use it, it conveys specific information. And you don't want to depart from that because all you do is confuse the issue. You confuse things. If you start calling it something else rather than what is widely accepted within the academic discipline as the way to describe this stuff, you're running afoul. And one thing is for certain, you wouldn't be able to get away with it if you were talking at some type of symposium or you're writing up a journal article.
Right.
You'd never get away with that. You have to use the language that is for the discipline. And so when you start hearing these things outside of the discipline, you do got to kind of wonder what's up. Okay. Now it's one thing to use the academic jargon in a non-academic setting and then explain what that means so that the people who are around you who don't know the jargon understand what you're saying. I do that routinely, especially if I'm talking chemistry, because who in the world studies chemistry except geeks like me? But you tread on very thin ice when you just start changing the academic jargon when you're not talking to academics. Right. There's a reason you're doing it, and that has to and that should send off warning signals. But if you don't know that, it's like, okay, what are these people actually hearing?
Well, it makes you appreciate the field of that particular academic. Because what if I would say, let's say that I would turn around and I would talk to Dr. Rolston, and I would say, "Oh, I heard that you found some early proto Hebrew inscription on, whatever the stone." he said, well, he would probably stop me. They're gracious, they're not rude. And he would say, well, first of all, it can't be Proto-Hebrew, it's too old. Its development is from a certain time period before we could actually call them, like the Hebrew development. Now, what I've seen for this case is one academic, I'm not going to call him a scholar, it's an academic. And he tried to use this type of writing, Proto-Sinaitic, as a way that Moses would have wrote. Moses would have wrote Proto-Sinaitic, not hieroglyph, not cuneiform. So it'd be easier to write the Ten Commandments. Now I know where he's going with this. All right, I understand where he's going with that, but there's absolutely no proof. And
Right.
he's talking in a way as though using Proto-Hebrew, as if the Hebrews invented it for that moment to be able to write. And I think that's way off base. You know,
Right.
I said, and first of all, to say that there was an alphabet for Moses to use. Now, the general population won't know this, but Petrie found the Proto-Sinaitic in 1905. We knew about the alphabet in that form for well over 100 years. And you're presenting it as if it's something like, oh my gosh, really? Like you said, when you listened to a person that was talking about a lecture they heard, and you said, wait a minute, you still got to assess it. You still got to go by facts.
Mm.
You can't listen to that one individual, especially in archaeology. We need more consensus in the field. And I think that's even true with the Proto-Sinaitic. When we're listening to different people talk about this subject matter, first of all, who's the scholar? Are they known? Who are they in the field? Now, that could be something to do with it. Also, where's your peer review and who else agrees with what you're saying? I always look at that as very, very important before I just go running off. Oh, I heard this in my church service. This guy was in the pulpit. They found Proto Hebrew. And we know that Moses now wrote the Ten Commandments, using these things. It's like, where in the world do you get that from? I mean, it's a nice thought. And was it there at that time period? Well, yeah, it could have been used at that time period, but there's no evidence of that. And to act like that's the way it happened is a total misrepresentation. If somebody is an academic in a position of authority, first of all, I don't think they would say it. My word is always with this material, as we're using right now. If people were not aware of this early alphabet form, you can go back and check it yourself. It's just,
Yes, you can.
easy to obtain on the web. This is not hard to find.
No.
And it's a lot of fun. But be very careful. Now, when you do this, there's also articles on the web where there's people that run amok. And just a word of warning, just be careful out there because I ran into them and I'm thinking like, where in the world? I mean, they come up with some pretty clever things. I always thought that the Proto-Sinaitic writing was alien. I think the first one is actually found in Roswell. Hey, I'm from New Mexico.
Well,
I can say that.
George, that first letter, that ox head, if you look at it right, it looks like one of those little oval heads with the black eyes.
Actually, it looks like my
Who
Uncle
knows?
Ernie. Yes, like Ernie. Wow, what the heck, Ernie? You were a
Oh
popular
my
boy
God.
back then. But yeah, you're right. The earliest form looks like an ox head.
It
And you
does.
wonder why? Why did they choose that? Why did they choose the ox head? You know,
Don't know.
but it's actually from the hieroglyphs. So you have to go back and say, well, why did the Egyptians use it? You know? But somebody was in Egypt that ventured off to places that were not so popular, like copper mines and
Yeah.
turquoise mines. And there they wrote down these inscriptions. And it must have got proficient enough. Now we're talking about the earliest form is 1900, Wadi el-Hol, as far as we know. But by 1700, according to that comb, and Dr. Rolston, which he's a trusted source there,
Yeah.
that comb is 1700 BC. That's only 200 years difference where somebody's making sentences now and possibly instructions. Proto-Sinaitic, turn left at the.
Turn left at the Wadi where the inscription is. It's
Yeah. Once again, we had a great time. We've been
yeah,
rambling now. This
yeah.
is going to end
Yeah.
up
I'm
just,
sure a lot of this back end stuff might get cut out, but hey, that's
well,
all right.
or they could just let it roll. They can cut out some for that's learning channel if they want the 30 minutes, and then leave the rest of it and just throw it on the YouTube. Nobody's going to care. People they're going to listen to how much they want to listen to, laugh as
Right.
long as they want to laugh, and then go back to watching aliens again or whatever. It's popular. I was looking at this one alien site, like it's like 1.5 million hits in less than a week. There's a lot of interest out there, and
Yeah.
so I've never seen
Yeah.
one yet.
Well, I have seen objects in the sky that I wasn't able to identify personally, which by definition would be an unidentified flying object.
But
But
you were in
that
Air Force.
has absolutely nothing to do with whether these things are
Yeah, we
anything.
went from Site Night to aliens. This is
Yeah, I
good.
know. We're
You know,
definitely digressing here. This is
digressing,
running
because
far afield.
you were you did some work for NASA. You could tell us some stories, man.
Well,
Did you actually sign something you can't tell us? You did, didn't you? You
no,
signed something that said like, I will never
I
ever
would.
say this to George or my wife or
I had two assignments at Wright-Patterson, and Wright-Patterson is where they did Project Blue Book out of.
oh,
If you have people that are into aliens and they know all
uh,
this stuff, they would always ask you the question, "Oh, you work at Wright-Pat? Where do they keep the aliens?" And so I would literally gaslight people. There's outside of Area B, which is where all the science stuff is, because there's different areas. So like Area C is where the flight line is and the golf courses. But that's where the flight line is. Area B is where all the scientific stuff is done. That's where all the labs are. And so they would ask me if there were, where do you keep the aliens on the base? And I would tell them very seriously. I would look them right in the eye and I would say, there are no aliens on the base.
oh, nice.
Okay. And they would look at me and no, no, sure they are. I said, no, you're not listening to me. There are no aliens on the base. And then finally they would say, oh, well, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, now you have been around Wright Pat, right? And you know where Area B is, where they do all the science. And they go, yeah. And I said, and you know that one area where the back gate is? And they go, yeah. And I said, well, across the street, did you ever notice that weird barn-like structure that's sitting there and it's got a fence around it? And they go, yeah. And I go, well, that's not on the base.
Very cool, very clever.
Okay. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh. And they would just eat this up. Well, what that building was, and it is not on the base proper. Okay.
Mhm.
But that is an all wooden structure that was built by the Amish. There are no nails, no anything in that. There's all wooden pegs. And the reason is that's where they did radar research. And you can't have metal in there. So they had to create this building that didn't have any metal in it. And the only people that knew how to do that were the Amish. Well, if you look at the building, it's the goofiest looking building. The bottom section looks like a standard barn, but the roof is unbelievably high. Unbelievably high. Because they had to set up all these structures inside, they needed all this room. And so the next question was, well, wait, I've seen that building. How do you get a flying saucer in there? And I go, well, you don't have to hang it this way, but you can hang it that way, right? And they're like, oh, and I said, remember, there are no aliens on the base. And
Nice.
I would get, and it was horrible of me to do that. But after a while, you just kind of get tired of people asking you that kind of stuff. And it's like,
Right. Well, I've
and
been to Wright
actually,
Pat
right. And
Memorial,
I actually
Yeah.
worked in building 51 back in the day. And that actually was the building that they ran Project Blue Book out of. Okay. Now it had been converted into laboratory space. But as soon as you say that, they're like going, oh my gosh, you must have all this stuff. I go, no, I go, it's a lab. As soon as they heard that, you're like going, oh, and it would be like a magnet. So when I went down to Roswell one time and visited down there, I didn't tell anybody what I did because I would have just had a group of people following me wherever I went if I told them that I worked at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. But you know, it's funny. Anyway, we have definitely digressed now.
That's okay. Yeah, people are going to like. this part better than the first part because next thing you know, we're going to have 1.5 million hits because you're going to have Paul Hesse back on there, Major Paul Hesse, because you know what? He diverted your question, George, and he knows something.
Yes, because remember, George, there are no aliens on the
Well,
base.
well, you heard it here first, folks.
There are
So
no aliens on it.
like and subscribe, and ask Paul to come back because he's going to tell us where these little green guys are hanging out at. You know, not that they're green, but what do I know? And they got
Yeah,
the coolest Air Force Museum you ever seen outside of Washington, D.C. We had the
it's now
Wright brothers there. And then we
the
had, let's say, that's beginning of flight. And then World War One flying ace, Eddie Rickenbacker from Ohio. He's actually buried up in the graveyard up in Columbus, Ohio. I forget the name of it. I went and saw it one time because I'm a history knucklehead. And
Mhm.
then, of course, we have Neil Armstrong, Wapakoneta.
Right, and there's an Armstrong Museum in Wapakoneta
Mhm.
that has a lot of his personal stuff.
You know what else is
Uh,
from Ohio? Paul Hesse, who works at Wright Pat and also Area 51. And I think
worked.
he
No,
knows
no, no, no,
something.
no. Area B,
He
not
knows
Area
something.
51. Those are two totally different things for the audience. If you do have an opportunity to get up to Dayton, Ohio, or Ohio at all, you should stop off at the Air Force Museum. Now it's called the National Museum of the United States Air Force. It has expanded dramatically over the course of years. There's 4 hangars of all these aircraft, all this history. You couldn't spend multiple days there and not get through it all. But it's all sectioned out in terms of time periods. So, like George was saying, they have early flight with like the Wright brothers to World War One, World War Two, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Cold War, modern stuff. It's a really, really, really neat place
Yes.
if you like
And
that
Neil
kind of stuff.
Armstrong walking on the moon. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
oh,
They have
yeah.
space stuff there too. They have Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo capsules. They have a Titan 4 rocket intact, laying on its side. Just massive, massive. It gives you a real perspective as to the size of some of these things. So really neat place. Just
Oh,
saying.
this has been
That's my 2 bits.
a lot of fun. We
But
started with proto-cyanide somewhere in a turquoise mine in the middle of a desert, and then now we're talking about aliens
and the Air Force
and,
Museum.
and at the Air Force Museum. So this is just this. It's crazy, but like I say, this is biblical archaeology from the ground up. Remember to like and subscribe. Paul, thank you for your time, but we
Thanks,
got to
George. I
go.
appreciate this. We'll do this again.
Oh, heck yeah, it's so much fun.